Hi, everyone. My name is Rogelio. I'm part of the Jest core team, and I work at Docker as a front-end engineer. Today, we're here to talk about Jest as a platform. But what does that mean? Let's break that statement apart. Let's start by talking about what is Jest. Jest is a JavaScript testing solution which focuses on being easy to set up, providing us with instant feedback, and working out of the box. And what do we mean by platform? By that, we mean something that is extensible, that works with your existing tooling, and that allows you to build on top of. So to understand what Jest as a platform is, we first need to understand what Jest is strongest at, which is testing. I really like testing, but for some reason, I find myself not writing tests a lot of the time. So how is it that if I really like something, I still don't do it as much as I should? A lot of it boils down to the overhead that comes when you're writing a test. You need to start thinking about all the tools that are surrounding it and how to stitch them together so that you have a good setup, which sometimes makes me think that I might just like the idea of testing. So at Docker, we were having this problem where we were not writing enough tests. And this was mainly because our test suite was too long to run, which meant that our iteration speed was also really slow. So one day I was chatting with one of my teammates to better understand why this was happening. And the reality is that if the tools are not working in your favor, it's really hard to write tests. And if you don't have an environment that makes it easy to do so, then you end up not writing them. And at that point at Docker, we were using a combination of tools that were not providing us with a cohesive experience. And a lot of it was not the tool's fault. On the contrary, they were all great tools, but we just never took the time to optimize how they work together, which meant that we ended up with this really slow testing solution. That's when we started to adopt Jest. And surprisingly, the transition was fairly simple. We removed a lot of dependencies, but most importantly, it meant that every time that we hired someone new, they will only have to worry about this single test dependency, making our ramp-up process way easier. So after we migrated our tests to Jest, they started running in a sixth of the time. And running a single test went from taking over 5 seconds to being almost instant. This means that our feedback loop was way tighter, and we were able to write more tests. Last but not least, it provided us with a better development experience. So let's see what it takes to set up Jest. By the way, the slides for this talk are going to be available in this GitHub repo, so you can use it as a reference later. For the rest of the talk, we're going to be using this small application called Emoji Cinema. Basically, it's a type ahead where you can type the name of a movie and you will get back its emoji representation. For example, if you type Frozen, you'll get a snowflake and a dress. If you type Finding Nemo, you'll get a lens and a fish. So let's see how this application works. It has this movie list component, which takes in a query and renders a list of movies. And if we go inside that movie list component, we'll see that it's calling this search movies function, which also takes in a query and returns an array of movies. For example, if you pass the letter F, it will return you all the movies containing the letter F. Now let's take a look at how this search movies function is implemented. It has a title. It takes in a query and filters to only return the movies that match that given title. And this is how our emoji map looks. It has the title and the representation of the emoji representation for each movie. And that's how our project structure would look. So let's see what it takes to add Jest to our Emoji Cinema application. Here's our package.json. And the only thing that we need to do is to add Jest as a dependency, and we're good to go. That's it. So here we have our search movies function. So let's go ahead and create a test file for it. We'll call it searchmovies.test.js. Now let's start Jest in watch mode, and let's see what happens. We can see that it found our test file, but it told us that there are no tests in it. So let's start writing one. It returns the movies that match that query, and it expects search movies of F to equal something. But I'm not sure what that something is. So let's just do what we always do, right? We'll just comment this out, and we'll just console log it. If we save it, Jest will pick up our changes, and we'll see that our console log statement was there. So now we can just copy over to our test file. And as we start saving it, you'll see that Jest keeps picking up the changes and rerunning our tests. And if we start making changes to the expectation, Jest will, again, pick up the changes and give us a pretty printed diff or of the error. So Jest has a lot more. But in the interest of time, and because we are going to be talking about Jest as a platform, we're not going to be able to cover all of it. If you're interested, I highly encourage you to go to its website for more information. So what did we get with Jest? We got an immersive watch mode. We got tests that run really fast, even at a scale. We got great user experience. We got a deep Git integration that will only run the test based on your Git status. And we got all of this with 0 initial configuration. So now that we all know about Jest, let's start talking about the platform aspect of it. And for this, we can think about it from 2 perspectives. The first one is to be able to cherry pick specific features of Jest and use them as standalone packages in your application. And the second one, which we'll talk more about later, is to be able to put your tooling on top of Jest and leverage its features and infrastructure. So let's start by talking about cherry picking a feature of Jest. Up until now, we've been talking about Jest as this single package. But if we zoom into it, we'll realize that it's composed by several independent packages, which each of them allows us to cherry pick a small feature of Jest. So let's take a look at a couple of them. We'll start with JestDiff. Remember when our test failed and it just gave us this pretty printed diff? Well, this was powered by this small package called JestDiff, which you can independently use in your application, regardless if you're using it for testing purposes or anything else. You basically just require it, and then call this diff function with 2 objects, and it will give you the diff between them. This works with deeply nested objects and any other serializable value. Now let's take a look at Jest Validate. I really like this one because it works for anything that needs to validate a configuration. This is what Jest uses for validating all of their command line arguments. So for example, here we have a super basic configuration where it says that watch equals true. And if we want to validate it, the only thing that we need to do is to provide it with an example config. And Jest Validate will do the rest. So if we change the value of watch, it will give you the appropriate validation error without us doing anything. And it's robust enough that it will allow us to insert links to our documentation, for example. Or we can even add like deprecated values of our configuration. In this case, we're deprecating watch instead of super watch. And last but not least, I think the package that I like the most is Jest Worker. This gives you all the power of parallelization without any of the complexities that come with it. So what does this mean? Let's use this simple example. In this case, we have this module, run.js, that knows how to run a test file. As you can see, this is a super oversimplification of what Jest is doing. But we have this module that receives a test file, and we have these test files, in this case, like searchmovies.test.js. And we want to run them in parallel. Well, this is exactly what Jest Worker will do for us. It will grab them, and behind the scenes, it will spin up independent node processes. And it will call this run test file method for each of those files. And at the end, I don't know, it will print out the results. So how do we use this Jest Worker module? First of all, we require it, and then we need to provide it with a path through this node module that is going to be instantiating in an independent node process. And we tell it which methods are going to be exposed. In this case, run test file. And then we just call it the number of times that we need it. And behind the scenes, Jest worker will take care of all the orchestration and making sure that it spin ups all the independent node processes. So that's how you cherry pick a specific feature of Jest. Now let's take a look at putting your tool on top of Jest. This is great because it brings a lot of the features that Jest gives to your tool. So to better understand this, let's take a look at the life cycle of a test run. It happens in 3 steps. First of all, Jest finds your test files, then it runs your test, and at the end is report the results. And as you can see, a lot of the heavy lifting, it's happening when Jest is either finding the test files or reporting the test results. So imagine if we could swap that middle part, also known as the runner, for our own tool. This means that Jest would do all the fancy work for us. So up until now, we've been talking about Jest as a platform, and we introduced this concept of the runners and Jest runners. But how does this look in practice? I'm sure that at this point, a lot of you are thinking like, sure, Jest is nice, but we have this like, at work we have this Mocha code base and we cannot just migrate it to Jest. And Mocha is actually a great example of something that could leverage Jest. So imagine if we could keep Mocha as our test framework and use Jest for the rest. And this is great because it allows us to migrate code bases without changing almost any code. So let's take a look at how this looks, because it's still pretty abstract. Here we have our same emoji cinema application, but in this case, it's using Mocha instead of Jest. So in order to add Jest and our Mocha runner, we simply add them as a dependency, and then we tell Jest to use that given runner. So here we have our same search movies test file, but in this case, it's using the assert library to make it work with Mocha. First, we're going to start Mocha to make sure that everything's working. And now we're going to go ahead and start Jest in watch mode. As you can see, it picked up the file and executed that Mocha test. And if we make changes, Jest will report the appropriate result, and it will pick up the changes with the watch mode. It even works with code coverage because it's leveraging the coverage reporting that Jest gives us. So it works out of the box also with code coverage. So we just saw how we can completely swap the test framework and keep Jest for the rest. But the cool thing here is that we can swap it for way more than that. And for this, we're going to need to start thinking of Jest less as a testing platform and more as a tooling platform. So let's use ESLint for this example. This is a great tool that we all use. But it could also leverage some of Jest features, specifically the watch mode and parallelization. Airbnb also started using this. So let's see what it takes to set up Jest with ESLint. So this is going to be the same as what we did for our Mocha runner, where we're going to add Jest and our ESLint runner as a dependency, and then we're going to tell Jest to use this given runner. Here we're also telling it to use this display name that is going to give us a nice identifier when we run our tests. And we're also going to tell it to look at all the JavaScript files and not only the test files. So if we start Jest in watch mode, we'll see that it found all of our test files and reported the ESLint errors. And as we make changes, Jest will pick it up and use that runner and report the ESLint errors. And we can even use the filtering mechanism that Jest provides to only run ESLint on that given, on like one file. So if we could use Jest runners for Mocha and for ESLint, it probably means that we can use it for way more than that. For example, we could use it to run Python tests. Here's an example of Jest running Python tests. So we've been talking about different Jest runners, but it seems about time that we start writing our own Jest runner. In this case, we're going to write a Blade runner. So imagine that we have this company policy that says that every file needs to have these two emojis. And if it doesn't have them, then it will fail. And if it has them, then it will pass. So how do we write such a thing? For this, let's take a look again at the life cycle of a test run, specifically at the runner part. First, Jest gives a list of files to the runner. And then, in this case, Blade Runner will spin up independent processes for each file. On each of them, it's going to check for the presence of the emoji, and then it's going to report back the results. So this happens mainly in two parts. The first one, which is the entry file, this is what Jest is going to be talking to. And the second one is going to be our worker file, which we're going to have in our run.js file. And this is going to get instantiated once per file, and it's going to be responsible of running the test for that given file. It has the domain of our runner. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of interesting stuff that needs to happen in between these two parts. For example, handling test interruption, or like keeping Jest up to date with the status of each test file, or spinning up the correct number of workers and cleaning them up afterwards. Also reporting the test results to Jest. So I created this small module called Create Jest Runner, which basically works pretty similar to Jest Worker, where we provide a path to a node module, and behind the scenes, Create Jest Runner will take care of parallelizing it, spinning up the workers, and orchestrating all of it for us. So let's go ahead and implement our Blade Runner. We're going to start with our entry file. Remember, this is what Jest is going to be talking to. The only thing that we need to do is we are going to require create Jest runner, and then we're going to call it with the path to our run file. Remember, this is the file that is going to get instantiated once per test file. And if we take a look at our run file, it's a function that, among other things, it will receive a path to the test file that we're running. And then on it, we're simply going to check for the contents of that file. We're going to check if it includes those two emojis. And then we're going to return either pass or fail. And create Jest runner also has this pass and fail functions, which the only thing that they do is normalize the data to the format that Jest is expecting. So now that we have our runner, let's go ahead and use it. We'll start Jest in watch mode. In this case, we're also going to tell it to look only at the search movies files. So you can see it found our two files, and as we start making changes on them and adding those two emojis, they start to pass. So that was Blade Runner. And up until now, we've been looking at these three different runners. And each of them look as completely independent projects. But for them, we're always modifying the same package.json, which makes it hard to have them in our code base at the same time. For this, Jest allows us to move these configurations out of the package.json and into configuration files. For example, for Mocha, we're going to move it to a Jest mocha.config.js. For ESLint runner, we're going to move it to a Jest eslint.config.js. And for our Blade runner, we're going to move it to a Jest blade.config.js. So now that we have them in independent config files, it means that we can use them all together. And the cool thing here is that Jest allows us to load them all up concurrently using a single instance of Jest. Let's take a look at how this works. So we'll go ahead and start Jest in watch mode. And we're going to tell it to look at different projects. In this case, all the ones that have jest.something.config.js. As you can see, it found the 3 projects. And as we make changes in one of the files, only the appropriate one will report the correct errors. So what's next? As you can imagine, this is just the beginning of Jest runners, and also of Jest as a platform. The applications here are way wider than what I showed. And this is an open area of research that I'm really excited about. That's it. Thanks for everything.
Right here. All good. Good. So thank you very much. Let's go for the questions. You ended a bit sooner, so I was in the backstage. Sorry for that. Yeah. Good. So let's go for the questions. Question number 1. How is that different from Docker? Sorry.
In a lot of ways. Yeah.
Would you like to share more specific qualities?
Okay. So they're really different. So Docker, those of you that are not familiar with, is this container runtime that allows you to create things in a container, to run things in an isolated environment, and to create like reproducible environments for your application. Well, Jest is more of a test runner, or a test framework, or now a test platform.
For some reason, the next question is, so what's the emoji representation of the movie Hostel?
Oh, I'm not going to go there.
I think that's a very smart decision. You say it's 6 times faster compared to what? What was the previous setup?
Right. So before that, we were using some in-house wiring of a lot of tools. And so that was super specific. Like, it was something that we wired up together using Karma and Mocha and Sinon. But they were all great tools, but our setup that we had was fairly bad just because how we wired it because of how we wired up together.
The next one, how is Jest getting along with AngularJS and its own dependency injection?
Oh, I'm not super familiar with that. So we can sync up downstairs. Because yeah, to be honest, I'm not super familiar to answer that question. But Jest tries to be as agnostic as possible and just be at a JavaScript layer rather than attached to any framework.
The next one, why not Enzyme but Jest?
So Enzyme can be used with Jest, and Enzyme is an amazing library for testing your React components, which can be used with Jest, which is just something that runs your tests and executes them. But it can more than happily be used with Enzyme.
Can you have multiple runners?
Yes, I guess that was before the last slide where we showed the multiple runners at the same time.
Is a better Webpack integration coming soon?
Right, so that's the part that I'm really excited about. Like, what are all these crazy things that can be used as a runner? And I think Webpack sounds interesting, but like, what are all those things where what a runner could be an interesting solution for?
Why should I use Jest over Mocha?
I think they're trying to solve different things, and I don't think that you should just use Jest over Mocha or vice versa. And I think my answer here would be fairly biased, but I think Jest tries to solve more at a like platform level. And again, here we showed how you could still use Mocha on Jest, and yeah.
Can you use Karma as a runner?
Good question. Yeah, I'm not sure. Good question.
Is it possible to create E2E test with it, or is it just for units?
So end-to-end tests, like if you're using something like Nightwatch, I think that it will be also something interesting to have eventually like as a runner. Well, it would leverage all of this watch mode, and you can still run Nightwatch tests. That would be fairly interesting.
What are the current shortcomings of Jest as a platform?
I think that it's still it's a super new thing, which means that a lot of the things and a lot of the ways where it needs to mature are still not well defined, and it's only like as the community gets more involved and this starts to mature that we'll realize like what are the shortcomings. Right now, for example, it has some really tight coupling with like your test, like with a one-to-one mapping of like a test suite to a test file, and there's a lot of things that Jest needs to improve to like better provide all of this, and that should just happen over time.
So we have time for 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Number 1, what apps do you use Jest for at Docker?
We use it for all of our front-end applications, which 2 of them are on the enterprise side, and 2 of them are on the like software as a service side.
And why should you use Jest when Mocha can also run on watched mode?
So Jest, it's not that you have to use Jest again. So Jest gives you a lot of, or tries to give you a lot of like the parallelization and a lot of a watch mode to like filter and be able to. So it's a matter of, it's not a one-to-one like you should use one over the other one.
Great, cool. Rogelio, thank you very much for your time, and please give it up for him. Thank you.